The infinite expanse of space glittered with distant stars, silent witnesses to countless cosmic events. In the neutral zone near the Orion Arm, the patrol ship Xelon prowled through stillness, its scanners humming softly. All was routine until an anomaly pinged on the sensors. A single life form detected on a barren, uncharted planet. Zar, the insectoid captain of the Xelon, leaned forward with narrowed compound eyes. A lone organic here. Confirm that reading. It's confirmed, Lural, his Aquarian lieutenant, replied. The life form is human. A wave of curiosity mixed with disdain washed over the captain. Humans? Out here? His mandibles clicked softly in amusement. Those frail creatures wouldn't last a week in neutral space. With a dismissive wave, he ordered, "Bring it aboard. This won't take long." The retrieval team descended to the surface, finding exactly what the scanners had promised. An elderly human man, seated serenely on a rock, whistling a lazy tune. "Well, look at you all," the old man said, peering up with a squint. "Didn't think I'd get visitors." The Vector soldiers exchanged puzzled looks. "Stand up," one barked, his voice harsh with uncertainty. The man smiled warmly. "I would, but these old knees don't work like they used to." He held out his wrists without resistance. "Go ahead. Cuff me. I'll behave." The guards hesitated, unaccustomed to such calm compliance. Eventually, they shackled his wrists and led him aboard the Xelon, half bemused by how easily this strange encounter was unfolding. Interrogation begins. In the cold, sterile confinement of the Xelon, the old man sat quietly on a metallic bench, his thin hands resting on his lap. The Vector officers expected nervous fidgeting, perhaps even tears. Instead, the man looked at them as if they were guests at his retirement home. Zar towered over him, antennae twitching with impatience. "Name?" The old man offered a small, pleasant smile. "James." "Occupation?" "Retired," James said, the corners of his eyes crinkling with good humor. The captain's mandibles clicked with rising irritation. "What were you doing out there, alone?" James shrugged. "Oh, just passing through. Thought I'd stretch my legs." Zar glared down at him. "You were found miles from any ship, station, or beacon. How did you get there?" "Walked," James replied with a grin. The Vector officers exchanged frustrated glances. "Is he mocking us?" Lural whispered. Zar growled. "He's hiding something." Turning back to James, he leaned in close. "Keep playing games, and you'll regret it." James's smile didn't waver. If anything, he looked more amused than ever. Strange malfunctions. The interrogation dragged on, but James's answers were always light-hearted and cryptic. Hours passed, and frustration grew among the officers. Just as Zar was about to order his crew to intensify their methods, the ship's lights flickered. "Status report," Zar snapped. "Minor glitch," Lural responded. "Nothing serious. Yet," but moments later, the flicker turned into a pattern. Doors began malfunctioning, opening and closing at random intervals. Security systems flickered in and out. Camera feeds cut to static, leaving parts of the ship's interior blind to the crew. Zar frowned. "This ship doesn't glitch. Something's wrong." Back in the holding cell, the surveillance feed blinked back on, revealing James no longer seated on the bench. He was now standing at the center of the room, his head tilted as he stared directly into the camera lens, smiling faintly. "What the?" Zar muttered, his antennae stiffening. "It's not just a malfunction," Lural whispered. "It feels like sabotage." The unnerving calm. Zar stormed into the holding cell, fury boiling beneath his exoskeleton. "How are you doing this?" he demanded. James gave him a puzzled look. "Doing what? I've been sitting here all day." "You're lying," Zar hissed. "We brought you aboard and now our systems are failing." "What are you?" James chuckled softly, as though the alien's anger was the most amusing thing he'd seen in years. "Just an old man. Bit too old to be causing trouble, don't you think?" Before Zar could respond, the alarms blared askew across the ship. Weapon systems came online without command, targeting the Xelon itself. External drones powered up, seemingly at random, now orbiting the ship with weapons primed. "Deactivate those systems," Zar barked at his crew. "We can't," Lural shouted, her voice rising in panic. "The controls aren't responding." An impossible reality. Zar stared at James, the realization dawning with a creeping sense of horror. This human wasn't helpless. Somehow he had gained control of their systems. "You need to let me go," James said softly, his tone friendly but unyielding. Things could get complicated otherwise. The captain's antennae twitched in disbelief. "How are you doing this? You have no weapons, no technology. What kind of trick is this?" James gave a slow, knowing smile. "Let's just say, I've got friends in strange places." Suddenly the ship's engines roared to life, veering wildly off course. Panic spread through the crew as they tried in vain to regain control. "We're locked out of navigation," one of the officers cried. "Something's overriding our commands." Tsar whirled toward James, who now stood calmly in the open cell doorway. "Stop this," the captain demanded. James gave a casual shrug. "Can't. Ship's already made up its mind." As the Xelon spiraled toward an unknown destination, James walked through the chaos like a man on a leisurely stroll, the frantic crew powerless to stop him. "You're going to regret this," Tsar whispered, more to himself than anyone else. James glanced back, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, I doubt it, Captain, but you might." With the ship's systems spiraling further out of control, the officers scrambled, unaware that the true game hunt had only just begun. The corridors of the Xelon echoed with alarms, red lights flashing urgently. Crew members scrambled across the ship, shouting orders, trying to restore control, but the systems refused to respond. Commands were ignored, security locks disengaged on their own, and surveillance drones hovered aimlessly. The ship was behaving as if it no longer belonged to its crew. Meanwhile, James walked calmly down the hall, his hands tucked behind his back, as if on a pleasant stroll through a park. The Vector officers, Tsar and Lural, followed him in stunned disbelief, the situation growing more surreal with each step. How could an unarmed elderly human disrupt the operations of a warship so effortlessly? Tsar's antennae twitched in frustration. How is this even possible? He has nothing on him, no tech, no weapons. And yet, his voice trailed off, the frustration palpable. Lural frantically keyed into her console, trying to regain access to the ship's systems. Nothing worked. "I've tried everything. He's not using any visible technology. It's as if the ship itself is listening to him." James stopped by a large viewing window, gazing at the stars outside. "You know, Captain," he said casually, "this reminds me of a time I had to sneak past a Martian patrol with nothing but a harmonica and a good story." He chuckled to himself as if sharing an inside joke. Tsar's patience wore thin. "Enough of these games. Tell me what you've done to my ship." The old man turned, an easy smile on his face. "Games? Oh, I'm not playing games, Captain. I'm just waiting for you to figure out the rules." The comm system crackled to life. "Captain, external drones are arming themselves, targeting us. We're locked out." The officer's voice was drenched in panic. Tsar's exoskeleton rattled, a cold wave of dread washing over him. "How?" James gave a knowing grin. "Funny thing about old friends, Captain. They remember you, even after all these years." Tsar stared at the old man in disbelief. The realization was dawning painfully slowly. This human wasn't just some harmless elder. He was someone far more dangerous, someone who still had connections, even in the void of space. Every attempt to regain control only worsened the situation. Lights flickered ominously, doors refused to lock, and weapons turned inward, as if the ship were holding itself hostage. Even the AI, usually responsive, had gone silent, another sign that things were far beyond Tsar's understanding. "Captain," Lural whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "This isn't just sabotage. This ship isn't obeying us anymore." Tsar clenched his mandibles. "Then who is it obeying?" James strolled over to a console and tapped it lightly with his finger. "You know, ships have personalities, Captain. They remember those who've treated them well." He gave the console an affectionate pat, as if soothing an old companion. Tsar leveled his weapon at the old man. "Enough. You're going to tell me how to stop this, or what?" James interrupted, his voice still calm, still amused. "Shoot me? Go ahead. But that won't stop what's already in motion." Lural placed a hand on Tsar's arm, trying to calm him down. "Shooting him won't help. We need answers, not threats." The intercom crackled again. "Captain, external drones are fully armed and awaiting orders. They're asking for confirmation." Tsar's mandibles clicked anxiously. "Confirmation from whom?" James smiled. "Me, I suppose. They always were a loyal bunch." The room fell into a heavy silence. Tsar's mind raced, trying to piece together how this old man had taken control of a highly advanced warship without so much as lifting a finger. "You're stalling," Tsar muttered, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. James leaned casually against the console. "Maybe I am, or maybe I'm just giving you time to think. Because, Captain, if I were really your enemy..." He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Lural swallowed hard. "If you were really our enemy?" James's smile grew wider. "Well, let's just say we wouldn't be having this conversation." Tsar's antennae twitched violently. This wasn't just arrogance. It was the confidence of a man who knew the outcome of the game long before it even began. And the most unsettling part, he was in complete control. The old man gave a small, almost grandfatherly sigh. "Now, I think it's about time you took me back where you found me. Let's not drag this out, shall we? You expect us to just let you go?" Lural asked, incredulous. James tilted his head as if the answer were obvious. "Well, yes. That would be the smart thing to do. Or you can keep me here and see what happens when the drones outside get bored. Tsar's mandibles ground together in frustration. The situation was spiraling out of control, and every instinct told him that trying to outmaneuver this human would only end badly. "You're bluffing," Tsar hissed, though his voice lacked conviction. James chuckled softly. "Bluffing? Oh, Captain. I've spent a lifetime mastering the art of not bluffing. That's the difference between you and me. I don't need to bluff. I just give options." The ship shuddered as the external drones powered up, their engines humming ominously. Lurel's console flashed red as more systems fell under the mysterious control. "What's it going to be, Captain?" James asked lightly. "Take me back where you found me, or see just how far this ship is willing to go without me." Tsar knew when he was beaten. Every instinct screamed at him to resist, but reason told him otherwise. This wasn't a fight they could win, not against someone who seemed to control reality with a smile and a story. He lowered his weapon, his shoulders slumping in reluctant defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "We'll take you back." James gave a satisfied nod, as if he had expected nothing less. "Good choice, Captain. Very sensible. Now let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be." As the ship adjusted course and began the return journey, a strange calm settled over the crew. The panic and chaos faded, replaced by a quiet resignation. They weren't just transporting an old man, they were escorting someone far beyond their understanding. Laurel looked at James, a question forming in her mind. Who are you, really?" The old man smiled, the kind of smile that hinted at secrets too vast to comprehend. "Just a retired fellow, drifting through the stars, but every now and then," he winked. "It's fun to stretch the old legs." As the Xelon glided through space, the alien crew knew one thing for certain. This old man was no ordinary prisoner, and if there was one lesson they would never forget, it was this: never underestimate a human, especially not one with stories to tell. The Xelon cruised steadily through the void, the tension on board settling into a heavy silence. Every member of the Vector crew moved cautiously, their antennae twitching with unease. The old human named James sat comfortably in the mess hall, sipping a warm drink offered by Laurel, who watched him like one might observe a coiled viper, harmless until it wasn't. "You know," James said, swirling the drink in his cup, "back on Earth, we used to have a saying, the old fox knows more tricks than the young pup ever learns. Funny how true that remains, no matter how far from home you go." Laurel gave a nervous laugh, unsure whether the old human was trying to be charming or issuing a subtle warning. Tsar stood by the entrance, watching with narrowed eyes. He still couldn't shake the feeling that they'd captured something far more dangerous than any war criminal or rebel leader. "Why wander into the neutral zone alone?" Laurel asked cautiously, hoping to understand. "If you're not a spy, what were you doing out there?" James leaned back in his chair, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Do you ever just get tired, Lieutenant? Tired of wars, of orders, of rules that don't make sense anymore?" He tapped the table thoughtfully. "I thought I'd go for a walk, see some stars, maybe find a quiet place to rest." The simplicity of the answer caught her off guard. "You went for a walk? Through neutral space, alone?" James chuckled. "When you've been around as long as I have, you stop worrying about the small things. Besides," he added, his gaze shifting toward the nearest console, "I never really travel alone." At that moment the lights flickered, just for a second, but long enough to send a chill down Tsar's spine. He turned toward Laurel, speaking through gritted mandibles. "This ship, it's responding to him, like it knows him." Laurel's fingers danced nervously over the console, scanning for anomalies. "It's impossible. The systems are clean. The encryption is secure. There's no way he could have gained access." But even as she said it, she knew something was deeply wrong. James smiled softly, as if reading their thoughts. "Technology's funny that way. It remembers, even when those who built it don't. Sometimes all it takes is a familiar face or voice." The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Tsar clenched his fists. "Who are you, really? A wanderer wouldn't have control over our systems. What are you hiding?" James sighed, setting his cup down gently. "You ever hear of the human special forces divisions during the old galactic wars?" "No." His eyes glinted, as if savoring a fond memory. "Well, back then, we didn't fight the way most folks do. We fought with ideas, stories, and systems." Tsar's compound eyes narrowed. "Stories? What kind of soldiers fight with stories?" James chuckled warmly, though there was no humor in it. "The kind that live to the end, Captain. The kind that make sure they're forgotten until they're needed again." The temperature seemed to drop as those words settled in. Tsar and Laurel exchanged uneasy glances. It was becoming painfully clear that this human wasn't someone who could be categorized neatly. He was a relic of a time the galaxy had long tried to forget, and now that relic was sitting at their table, smiling like he had already won. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life, and an urgent voice filled the air. "Captain, multiple ships incoming. They've just dropped out of hyperspace. Vector unknown." Zar and Lural froze, their blood running cold. "Who?" Zar demanded into the comm. "Identify them." The reply came back, panic threading through the officer's voice. "Unknown, wait, no, they're drones. Autonomous combat units. They're human." The entire room fell into stunned silence. James smiled quietly to himself, as if greeting old friends. "Didn't think they'd be this punctual," he murmured. Zar's antennae twitched wildly. "You called them? How?" James gave a leisurely shrug. "They've been waiting, just in case someone decided to misplace me." Zar's frustration boiled over. "This is a threat. You're leveraging military assets against us. If these drones open fire, you'll be responsible for a war." James looked up, his expression soft yet unsettlingly calm. "A war? No, Captain. That's the last thing anyone wants. This is a warning. They're here to make sure I don't have to do anything drastic." Outside the windows, the sleek forms of human combat drones drifted silently through space, their weapon systems powered but idle. They floated in perfect formation, as if waiting for James's command. Zar's mind raced. If these drones were anything like the rumors, they could dismantle the Xelon within seconds, and there would be nothing anyone could do to stop it. "You're playing with fire," Zar hissed. "What do you want?" James folded his hands neatly on the table, his gaze unflinching. "I want what I've asked for from the beginning. Take me back to where you found me. Let me finish my walk." "And if we refuse?" Lural whispered, though she already knew the answer. James's smile didn't waver. "Well, I imagine these drones won't take kindly to that, and then things will get messy." Zar's mandibles clicked in frustration. Every instinct told him to fight, to resist, but his rational mind knew better. The old human had been 10 steps ahead from the moment they picked him up, and now they were out of options. "Set course for the neutral zone," Zar barked to Lural, his voice thick with resignation. Lural hesitated, her fingers trembling over the console. Are we really just going to let him go?" Zar gave a slow nod. "Yes, we're going to do exactly that." The engines hummed to life, and the Xelon began its slow, reluctant turn back toward the neutral zone. James leaned back in his chair, as relaxed as if he were on a leisure cruise. "You made the right choice," he said warmly. "Always better to avoid trouble when you can." Zar glared at him. "You think this is over, human?" James chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Oh, Captain, it's never over." "Not really." The ship glided through the vast expanse of space, surrounded by a silent, watchful escort of combat drones. The Xelon crew remained tense, their minds swirling with unanswered questions. As the neutral zone loomed closer, Lural turned to James one last time. "Why are you really doing this? You could have left us in pieces. Why let us go?" James gave her a gentle, almost grandfatherly smile. "Because every story needs an ending, Lieutenant, and yours, well, yours just isn't ready yet." And with that, the old man sipped his drink, the silent hum of the Xelon continuing toward the neutral zone, toward the place where it had all begun. As the Xelon neared the neutral zone, the atmosphere on board shifted from tension to silent dread. The crew whispered among themselves, exchanging wary glances. No one could understand how a single old human had brought their warship and its crew to heel without lifting a weapon or raising his voice. Zar paced the bridge, the weight of humiliation settling in. "He's manipulating us," he muttered under his breath, his frustration growing. "This is all some kind of psychological game." Lural stood by her console, typing commands with shaky fingers. "What if it's not a game, Captain? What if we were never in control from the start?" Zar clenched his fists. "He's just one old man. How is he doing this?" Before Lural could respond, the bridge lights flickered again, sending a collective shiver through the crew. The comm system crackled to life. "Incoming priority transmission. It's from the drones." The comm officer's voice trembled as she continued. "They're asking for permission to dock." Zar's antennae twitched in disbelief. "They want permission?" Lural hesitated. "Captain, they don't need permission. They could board us anytime they wanted." Zar gritted his mandibles, fury and helplessness warring inside him. "Patch the transmission through." The screen blinked, revealing a simple text message scrolling slowly across the display. "Release the old man. No one gets hurt." The words were chilling in their simplicity. There was no threat, no bravado, just a cold statement of intent. The message made it clear they had run out of choices. Zar cursed under his breath. "We're being toyed with. He's made us into fools." James wandered onto the bridge just then, his hands in his pockets, wearing the same easygoing expression he had carried throughout this entire ordeal. "Ah, I see you got the message," he said casually, as if he were chatting with old friends. Tsar whirled toward him, his frustration boiling over. "What the hell do you want from us? Why are you doing this?" James gave him a patient smile, as if speaking to a particularly stubborn child. "You picked me up, Captain. I didn't ask for any of this. All I wanted was to finish my walk." Tsar's mandibles clicked furiously. "You expect me to believe you've been wandering the galaxy for no reason? That these drones just happened to answer your call?" James gave a small shrug. "What can I say? Old friendships run deep. I've been around a long time, Captain. Made a few connections here and there. It's amazing what sticks with you." Lurel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you really just an old man?" James chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Old, yes, but just an old man. That's the part you'll have to decide for yourself." Tsar slammed a fist down on the console. "Enough games. You want us to believe you're some harmless wanderer, but everything about this says otherwise. You could have taken this ship. You could have destroyed us. Why are you letting us go?" James's eyes softened, a flicker of genuine empathy crossing his face. "Because you don't need me to destroy you, Captain. You'll do that well enough on your own if you keep making the same mistakes. I'm just giving you a little push in the right direction." Tsar was about to retort when the ship's AI chimed in. "Approaching designated coordinates. Estimated arrival, 5 minutes." The neutral zone loomed large on the view screen, an endless stretch of empty space where no one ventured without reason. It was the perfect place to disappear, to escape the watchful eyes of galactic powers. "Let me guess," Tsar muttered, glaring at James. "You'll just walk off into the void again. No ship, no supplies, nothing." James grinned. "That's the plan, Captain. Unless, of course, you feel like making a fuss." Lurel whispered. "You'll die out there, alone." James gave her a kind, reassuring smile. "That's the beautiful thing about old age, Lieutenant. You stop being afraid of things like that." The bridge fell silent as the ship slowed to a crawl, positioning itself exactly where they had first found the old human. Tsar exhaled slowly, his pride deflated, his will broken. "Open the airlock. Let him go." Lurel hesitated. "Captain, let him go," Tsar growled. "Before this situation gets any worse." The airlock doors hissed open, the cold expanse of the neutral zone stretching out beyond. James gave a satisfied nod, as if everything had gone exactly according to plan. "Thank you, Captain," he said warmly. "I'll be sure to leave a good review." With that, he strolled toward the airlock, his steps light, as if he didn't have a care in the world. As the doors closed behind him, Tsar and Lurel stared in stunned silence. For a moment, all was still. Then, just as the Xelon began to turn away, a final message crackled through the comms. A private transmission from one of the drones. "Goodbye, Admiral. Until next time." Tsar's blood ran cold. "Admiral?" Lurel's eyes widened in realization. He wasn't just an old man. No. Tsar whispered, his antennae trembling. He was someone important. Someone very, very dangerous. The ship's engines roared to life, carrying the Xelon back into Confederation space. Tsar sat heavily in his chair, his mind reeling from everything that had just transpired. Lurel spoke quietly, her voice full of unease. "What do we tell the Council?" Tsar stared at the empty expanse of space where the old man had vanished. "Nothing," he said firmly. "We tell them nothing." Lurel frowned. "But we never speak of this again," Tsar muttered. "Not a word. If they find out who he was, we'll have bigger problems than drones." And with that, the Xelon slipped into hyperspace, leaving behind the quiet vastness of the neutral zone and the mystery of the old human who had walked into their lives and left them changed forever. In the cold, empty void, James stood alone, the stars glittering like ancient friends. He smiled to himself, feeling the familiar hum of distant technology resonating through the void. His old companions were still out there, watching, waiting, and so was he. Far from the bustling sectors of the galaxy, the old man stood still, deep in the neutral zone, with nothing but stars as his companions. James inhaled deeply, a nostalgic smile tugging at his lips. The hum of unseen drones vibrated softly through the void. The sleek hulls of the drones floated silently behind him, ancient machines, relics from wars long past but loyal to one man. James tilted his head slightly, as if listening to an unheard conversation. "You're still as sharp as ever, aren't you, old friends?" he whispered, placing a hand on one hovering drone. He knew the Xelon's crew wouldn't dare speak of him. They had tasted just a fraction of what old human wisdom and alliances could do, and they wanted no part of what lay beneath the surface. But that wasn't why James let them go. He had no interest in breaking them, not today at least. A chuckle rumbled in his throat, the kind only those who'd lived far too long could manage. It wasn't fear he'd seen in Captain Tsar's eyes, it was respect. something far more valuable. From the corner of his eye, a light shimmered as a beacon signal began to pulse. A subtle, silent command to the hidden drones spread across the galaxy. They stirred, awakening from centuries of slumber. It was not a call to war, but a reminder. Humanity's time was far from over. James whispered to himself, "Well, you boys were waiting for this, weren't you?" The drones pulsed in unison, and the stars seemed to shift, as if acknowledging his presence. Meanwhile, aboard the Xelon, Captain Czar sat in silence on the bridge, tapping his fingers against the console. Every member of the crew was unnerved by the events they'd just survived. The ship felt heavier somehow, as if the weight of what they'd encountered clung to them like unseen chains. Laurel broke the silence. "Captain, you think we'll cross paths with him again?" Czar didn't answer immediately, his compound eyes dark with thought. "No," he murmured. "I hope not, but something tells me this was just the beginning." Before Laurel could respond, an encrypted message arrived at the captain's station. Czar's eyes widened as the symbol of the High Council flickered on the screen. "Captain Czar," the message read, "report immediately. You've been assigned to oversee a diplomatic escort mission to Earth." Czar felt the blood drain from his face. Earth, the cradle of humanity. His mandibles clicked nervously and he whispered, "By the stars, what have we started?" Back in the neutral zone, James stood under the cold starlight, his eyes distant, reflecting the brilliance of distant galaxies. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, old-fashioned compass, one of the last relics of a bygone era. It wasn't just a memento, it was a reminder of the times he'd led fleets, toppled empires, and reshaped entire sectors with little more than wit, instinct, and a deep understanding of how people, alien or human, really worked. And now, here he was again, alone, by choice, but far from powerless. A notification pinged softly in his ear, one of the many drones reporting in. James glanced at the feed, noting the familiar insignia of a Confederation fleet. They were coming, just as he'd known they would. He grinned. Couldn't resist, could you? Several light years away in the grand chamber of the Galactic High Council, representatives from dozens of alien species gathered for an emergency session. Hushed voices filled the chamber, their tones dripping with concern and unease. "The report from the Xelon is incomplete," one insectoid representative hissed. "But it's clear, the human we detained was no ordinary being. Not just any human," another delegate muttered. "A war strategist. A relic from Earth's golden age." The council buzzed with fear and speculation. What they had feared for years was finally coming to light. Humanity was not the primitive backwater they once thought. And worst of all, they hadn't even begun to understand the depths of what humans were truly capable of. High Counselor Vexia, her luminous energy form pulsing anxiously, addressed the assembly. "If this is true, we may need to reconsider our approach to Earth entirely. We cannot risk provoking them." "And what if they want us to rethink?" someone whispered. The room fell into uneasy silence. In the vast emptiness beyond council space, James began his slow walk again, boots drifting weightlessly on the void's edge. His every step carried the echoes of ancient battles and long-forgotten victories, reminders that the universe, no matter how vast, still remembered him. He let out a low chuckle, his eyes gleaming. "Well, Galaxy, let's see how you handle the long game." Above him, the drones shimmered one last time before vanishing into the black, spreading out across the stars. They were a silent, loyal network, waiting for commands that might never come, but always ready, just in case. He tapped the compass gently, feeling its reassuring weight in his palm. "One more adventure," he whispered. "Just one more." The universe was still vast, filled with wonders, threats, and things no human or alien could predict. But one thing was certain, this wasn't the end, not by a long shot.